All right, well, welcome to AIAEB. This is our AIAEB lecture series. It's a 9-part lecture series, really honoring and giving the opportunity for great people in our community to speak. So we're calling it Leaders Shaping Our Community. My name is Brian Stryzik. I am an architect at Tinley Architecture and Planning, but I'm also the AIAEB 2022 board president. So as board president last year, I had a few goals. One was to get a new office space. So we are here now, moved from Oakland to Berkeley. This is our new home for hopefully many years to come, close to the university. It's been a great place to be, around lots of like-minded individuals in the building. So it's been really exceptional to be here. Secondly, I wanted to reach all four counties of our chapter. So we're a chapter that links from Napa to Solano County to Alameda, where we are now, and then all the way down to Contra Costa County. So from Fremont to Napa to the Tri-Valley to Solano County. So Vacaville. So we went to all those different regions, had events there, and really had really engaging conversations with the members. So, and third, I wanted to have a lecture series to kind of bring those two together, really honor our new space, really celebrate it. And then secondly, just to continue those conversations that I felt many of you guys meeting each other and talking about hopefully architecture, but and then some personal things. Sure. So this 9-part lecture series, we started off with the history of the Bay Area, led into the renovating those historic buildings, moved into these global ideas of planning in the East Bay, and now we're kind of breaking down into different project types. So we've done institutional, and today is the middle of our lecture series. This is number 5 of 9, so 4 to go, 4 are already gone. Talking about civic architecture, so we have a great collection of people today. There we go. Tonight will be moderated by Susi Marzuola for
And will I do the introduction?
You will. I'll introduce you. You want to introduce you?
No, do it.
All right. Susi Marzuola from Legal Trade. She's a principal there. She's also a former president of the AIAEB. Great participant in the community. Strong environmental and design focused mentality. So it's been an honor to get to know you over the years, and I'm glad that you're here to moderate, and it's not me. I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce and let you go. Oh, I have one more thing. So we made mugs. I want to say a thank you. Hopefully you guys do well. Maybe the thank you a little early, but I have water and mugs for you guys. We have water. It's fun if you can drink and watch yourself. So
If we don't do all this,
I'll take it back. I'll take it back at the end of this presentation. This is not going well.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. There you go. All right.
Look at that.
Please welcome Susi and our panelists.
So we are in for a ride. We have an hour and a half, and everybody's assured me their presentations are 3 minutes or less. So we'll have a lot of time for discussion. That's a joke. So we do have great panelists tonight. Many of them, I'm sure, are here because you know them, but I'm going to go through brief introductions. Rona Rothenberg is an owner's representative and citizen architect who works from the inside out on state and local building programs, and that's how she knows many of the other speakers on our panel tonight. She's worked on the California State Courthouse program, and her contributions have been recently recognized with by the AIA with the Thomas Jefferson Award.
Jefferson was a classmate.
I see.
I'll get to that.
And if you've flown in and out of SFO International, if you've been anywhere near Lake Merritt or attended a mass or an event at the Christ the Light Cathedral in Oakland, or if you have marched in downtown LA, you're likely familiar with Craig Hartman's work, SOM design partner. Mark Cavagnero has also left a pretty lasting imprint on shared spaces in our public lives here in the East Bay. That's the iconic Oakland Museum and the East Bay Center for Performing Arts, also downtown Oakland, and touched many a building in the San Francisco Center area, including historic landmarks like the War Memorial, building and new landmarks like the Jazz Center, SHS. Rodney Friedman is mostly known for housing in the San Francisco and the Bay Area, East Bay area, but also responsible for a couple of local landmarks in the East Bay, the Emeryville Civic Center or City Hall, and the Chabot Space and Science Center in the Oakland. So our format for tonight is that each of our panelists will share some images of their incredible work and talk to us about what they've done over their very long and impressive careers. In between presentations, we'll take a question or two or have a moment of discussion before moving on to the next presentation. So I'll moderate. Brian will keep time.
One time.
And Rona.
Okay. This is my brief but spectacular take on my life and career in the public sector, our work in public architecture, and the importance of architects for government. When my daughter Sarah and I, that's her as a baby when I graduated from Berkeley 40 years ago, when we went to see the musical Hamilton a few years ago, we were delighted by the upbeat music and dynamic choreography. We were surprised that the historical story told through the unforgettable and clever musical theater is still relevant today. To the importance of civic architecture and the roles and contributions architects make in the public realm. We have a tradition of public service in our family. My parents were first-generation Americans. My dad, second from the lower left in the photo at the pyramid, left engineering school in 1941 at age 17, went into the Army Air Force in North Africa on the campaign that turned the war. He finished his degree in 1948 on the GI Bill and spent a long career on the NASA program as chief engineer at HUD. My husband and children also have careers in civic and military work. I hope those little grandchildren are inspired to contribute to the public good someday like us. In Hamilton, we were particularly taken by the piece In the Room Where It Happens. I can sing it, so I won't do it now. Perhaps you know that this was about the famous compromise of 1790 among the founding fathers, Jefferson, Hamilton, and Madison, about how and when decisions important to the Republic would be made, issues concerning time and place, and how to act and what to do. Jefferson's legacy contributions to American public architecture demonstrate the importance of architects within and to government, of government buildings which are enduring, where and how building programs are realized in government, and the big rooms where that happens in design and construction of public buildings for which we're all involved. Regardless of how we view him now, Jefferson, architect, statesman, slave owner, and a man of privilege, was a man of his time, a man who envisioned a more perfect union someday. In comparison and contrast, the late Representative John Lewis, statesman and patriot, son of sharecroppers, said, the dream is still in process of becoming reality. That's why our work matters. As architects in the civic realm, in government, in practice, designing government buildings, and architects who build, manage, and teach. It's been my experience as an architect in California state and local government, and I've learned from my public sector colleagues from the federal government, the military, and the local, regional, and other sectors that planning, design, and construction in the civic realm is well served by consistent approaches applying proven best practices in program delivery and in partnerships with community leaders, industry partners, clients, and others, and development and adoption of basic standards and guiding principles for civic design. Many things change in our business, you might notice, over the years, but there's no substitution for good tenets for public buildings. Dedicating my career to managing capital projects and programs within the public and private sector institutions gave me a voice and an impact in improving citizens' lives with work with some of you, all of you who serve in the civic realm, by facilitating adoption and an application of design and construction excellence standards. And I think it's appropriate without exception. Modeling design standards and then applying principles and project management delivery invests in a large body of safe, accessible, sustainable, resilient, programmatically and functionally fungible, durable, lasting, and even beautiful new buildings and repurposed existing buildings and campuses through plans and projects which are affordable to build and maintain and serve the public for generations to come. I think this can happen at any level of government for any project, from the profane to the sacred. Standards should be durable and dynamic and subject to technological advances and changes over time, and flexible to budget setting, timeline, and needs. I've had the privilege of working with Mark and Craig and Steve and their colleagues and others in the 2 decades that I led capital programs in the state and county. I'm extremely proud of our work, and I can't thank everyone enough for working with me. I'm proud that we provided access to justice for Californians in safe, functional, and lasting campuses and programs, which continues today. In our work, I think they would agree with me, it has and continues to be a philosophy, a standing philosophy, to develop strong partnerships among government officials who are the stewards of projects, who can happen at any level: mayors, judges, sheriffs, administrators, managers, and the ordinary people that work with us, that feed and care for the building, and with GCs, CMs, the trade, and local vendors as advocates and not as adversaries. As an institutional architect, I continue to advocate for design excellence, however that applies to the exact functional site, programmatic scope, cost, and time constraints and opportunities of each site, community, and owner, and within the culture of the institution, and the client group, and the personality, climate, geography, and setting of the place. It was my practice to work side by side with and support project managers, executives, clients, builders, construction managers, and talented architecture firms of all types and sizes all over the state and the country to produce outstanding public works, utilizing whatever delivery methods, tools, means, and methods were available and affordable. This may take time, and different project approaches applied. So we found that patience, and the right temperament were as important as technical skill or even money. I would posit to you that in our industry going forward, best value design and construction, delivery, decision making, and the most effective projects and teams are integrated. Technology and advances in design requirements facilitate dynamic and interactive teamwork, but also require these approaches for mutual success. The tradition, I think it's a tradition, of linear silos, both on the design side and the construction side, controlled by each discipline in a competitive atmosphere, should be retired as a thing of the past. But good old-fashioned thoughtful problem solving, excellent design and construction skill, and strong collegial teamwork by respectful professionals with mutual project goals can never be replaced. I think architects are particularly well suited as problem solvers in institutional capital planning, construction, design, and program management, as well as roles as traditional consultant planners and architects. I think we have the depth and breadth of training and the diversity of interest and temperament to hugely influence decision-making about strategic planning, capital programs, sites, development of workable, functional, and space programs, and building life cycle operations and maintenance, and then design excellence in technical and aesthetic criteria, whatever that means for any one client, project, or program. My vision for a relevant future for our profession, as I hopefully someday will prepare to pass the proverbial hard hat to the next generation, future generations of architects, is that opportunities and challenges of our time are opportunities to be seized, and they're not threats. I challenge more of our fellow architects, I'll keep doing this, to consider and pursue new and different solutions beyond traditional paradigms for approaching design and construction solutions and delivery. Consider the potential to invest in the public realm through architecture in a new and different career path beyond traditional practice, as it was always practiced from the 19th century Beaux-Arts until today. Optimize the potential in your firms or with your teams of doing important work in the public sector on civic works with long-term public benefit across generations, races, cultures, backgrounds, educational, career, and training paths, genders, or physical abilities. To think that our collective work as architects serves the public within and outside institutions through numerous and enormous exercises of planning, funding, and procurement, and design and construction of civic buildings and infrastructure. It's truly remarkable. Sometimes it even seems like a miracle that anything gets built at all. Our work as architects involved in civic work demonstrates what the founders started and what visionary leaders like John Lewis have continued, that work in government matters and the work goes on. Our work in California, and particularly in design and construction in the public sector, is a big room, a room where it happens for policy and advocacy of the built environment. We should continue to advocate as an architect's voice so decisions can be made to influence the public good for future generations of Californians through excellent architecture and design. When I consider that work that many design, construction, and client teams I led over the years resulted in completed works that have had a positive impact on health, welfare, and life safety of the public, access to public services, and improved communities, I'm really humbled. I think you have to be yourself. I'm grateful in my long career working in public buildings that I stayed out of trouble, did some work which was wow, never had anyone say, what was she thinking? And I really had some fun. I'm fortunate that I was able to continue to support my family with well-paying work. I stayed married for 44 years, and that goes on. Supported our parents, children, and now little grandchildren. I relish the opportunity to give back to public and community service. I like having time to see a bit of the planet, walk my dog, play with my grandchildren, bake delicious breads, make books, learn the banjo. Handmade in California. Do your work, follow your drummer, live your life, and consider opportunities to contribute in architecture in the public realm.
So I do have a question for you, a follow-up question, which has to do with public participation. A lot of this work we're talking about tonight is very public, it's for people, it's for the public. And in what I have found in recent requests for proposals and qualifications, there's a robust requirement for participation during the design process. And I was wondering if you could share a story or two. I'm sure a few of you up here have had that kind of, I mean, in your work in this regard, have you been involved in the public participation aspects, and what can you offer us in that regard?
Well, it's required by law, and every jurisdiction is different. I mean, I guess I found really in the public sector, self-government, really, an institution can do what it wants,
Right.
but it's good to have the input of the local community, and it really varies a lot from place to place. I don't think there's a one size fits all for that, and our colleagues would probably agree, but it's usually informative. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
it's not,
Yeah.
we're not doing the work for ourselves, really. We're really doing it for the people there. And then when, like, for example, when you see these pictures of people having a concert in the summer in San Bernardino, do you know how hot it is there? It's hot. And there's palm trees, they cost like $40,000 each, and there's 36 of them. And people gather in the summer under those palm trees, and it's a public space. So I think that if you're the client, even if you're the client, you don't always have a say on who is included, but there are ways to facilitate it, and if it's possible, then certainly an asset.
Any other questions at this point for Ron before we move on?
Okay, do you guys have any opinions on that?
I would just, it was an interesting question, Susie. I think probably everybody's an architect in this room
Right.
fronts this in San Francisco, Bay Area, because this is the hyper democracy we live in here, and everyone has an opinion, everyone has a voice, and I've ironically, for me personally, it's the work I've done with public buildings has had much less public input, ironically, than private buildings. And so when you're trying to build a residential building in a neighborhood, that's when you get public participation. I'm sure our close is pretty well too. And I'm sure Rod does, but so that's, and I don't, there's really no real answer for this, I don't think, but at least I don't know, maybe magic bullet. I will say though that truth, transparency, physical evidence of what you're doing, a model, a model is the best thing ever to try to either convince someone or not about what you're doing. Computer renderings, forget about it. So that's a little sort of a trade trick. Anyway, that's my take on this.
Rodney, anything to add to this question of public participation during the design process?
Oh, the only thing I've done for years, which is quirky, but I've always done it, is, on these large public projects, when we present or I present this time, I'm a big note taker, you know, so I'll write down Susie and what she said, or Rodney, what he said. And if it's something I can't address, or we'll look at it, or whatever, don't know if the client will agree to it. Okay, we move on. Then we go back to the subsequent meeting a month later, 2 months later. I've always gone back and said, you know, when we met in March, Brian asked about, and then even when the answer is no, we looked at it, we talked about it, didn't get it, doesn't work, whatever. I've always found that half the time, 2/3 of the time, the people feel like they just want to be heard and participate honestly. And if you remember their name, you remember their question, you give them an intelligent, honest answer, very often you take a lot of the ardor off their sword, you know, and they just kind of accept that. Not always, but I found it amazingly helpful to personalize and not depersonalize the public comment.
And engage folks in a conversation like it is a shared space, like you would with a family member about.
If they trust you and they feel like you're being honest and you looked at it and it can't work for a variety of reasons, many people, most people are intelligent and will let it go, even if it's not the answer they want. What aggravates them to no end is they feel as though you're ignoring them and just skipping beyond their concern without addressing it. I think that's the worst thing to do.
Yes.
The perfectionist of the community participation is Charles Moore. Before Charles Moore, it was the architect and the public, and the architect depending on as we go prevail. And Charles Moore invited the participation. I worked on 9 projects with Charles. And the first time we interviewed in the Pleasant Hill City Hall. And I was standing next to Santa Claus. And they asked me, how's this going to go? Charles, this big broad smile, said, well, you're gonna design it. And I thought, what's he talking about? So one of the things that they did in the first meeting with the public, we handed out cameras to everybody that was there in the morning and told them to come back in the afternoon with pictures of buildings they liked. And they came back and then we mounted all of these pictures of buildings they liked on boards. Oops. And we were going to use, Charles was going to use that for the inspiration. My job is to keep the building completely. And this is a big thing out there. And so Charles thought that was great. He says, all my buildings leak. And after this process went through about 3 iterations, we came up with a design for the city hall. Now, did the city really design it? No. Charles was the master of making sure that the public thought they designed it. And because we have all these pictures of buildings that the public in Pleasant Hill liked, that's how we did it. Now, it was this was before green architecture prevailed. And we did the mechanical system, like put in a pond, we put in a recycling situation with the pond, we did all the air conditioning. Now, I worked on 9 projects with Charles. And he was this captivating personality that brought us to trial. And unfortunately, he passed away the night before we were going to go through the various cities that we have. And now, Craig Hartman is one of the few survivors.
Well, Craig, why don't you take it away?
And literally 3 weeks out of having graduated from that school, I began work at SOM, which was would be 1 month from now, 50 years, which is just, it pains me to say that, I can't believe I say that, but and I've been a partner for about 40 of those years. So Susie asked a question about how you got interested in civic architecture or whatever the firm's direction is. That's one. There is no. We don't have specific market. Well, we kind of do now, but market, sectors, but it's really up to what, especially design partners, are really what they're passionate, what they're interested in. Mine was never really monetized architecture, commercial architecture, but rather work that is public, civic, cultural work, academic work, projects that are programmatically driven. I've tried to apply over the years a kind of a personal ethos to work, whether it's civic work or otherwise. And the idea of form, structure, and light are the three kind of parts of this that are kind of overriding for me in thinking about ethos for architecture. And by structure, I don't mean just the columns being built, obviously that, but the relationship between the way, what makes a building stand up, what makes it operate, how does it survive in the world, and how does form relate to that. And the structure of an idea, the clarity of the idea, the clarity of the concept is really metaphorically part of that. And finally, light is, I think, is absolutely indispensable in terms of making places that are places of delight. And form is not simply about the object or the shape of it, but really what it contains, the nature of the space within. In civic architecture, though, there are, I think, a handful of principles that I do think are really important to consider. And they are in part that from the upper left-hand side there about a civic building, especially a building that's serving a people, a government building should be set apart from the commercial realm. It should provide a place of gatherings for people to express with a voice whether they approve or disapprove what the government's doing. It should be elevated with a piano nobile, so that it had again a sense of a slight remove from that commercial realm and a sense of a position of dignity. And finally, the interior spaces should be those that have generous proportions and are filled with natural light. A kind of a formal thing, of course, that we all know about is the sort of try to find in our government rules, especially is a sense of balance and stability. The sort of the bilateral symmetry that is kind of part of Beaux-Arts, basic formula of architecture is perhaps part of that, but there are other ways to find that proportion. It's interesting that for centuries, for a couple centuries in America, the model course was European architecture. And here we see a Supreme Court that Cass Gilbert did. That was a direct lift from Thomas Jefferson's State House in Virginia, in Richmond. And Thomas Jefferson's piece was a direct lift from the Romans, from Maison Carrère in Nîmes, France, when he was a diplomat. So it was Patrick Moynihan in the Kennedy administration who turned that on his head and really posited that we should be about what our current contemporary culture is about, society is about. So this has actually opened, in some ways, opened the doors for many possibilities and perhaps also maybe some chaos. So that's something maybe we can talk about where we are in architecture at this point in public buildings. The first building I had the opportunity to do when I came to San Francisco was the renovation and adaptive reuse of the Court of Appeals. Originally, the San Francisco main post office and federal courts building. We essentially moved, took the postal sorting area out and made that into a new space that was for libraries and for community gathering space. Space isolation, entire building jacked up to preserve the piece. The central piece, the postal sorting area, now a central atrium space, was really about bringing light into the historic building, revealing the existing historic portion of the building in light, and also revealing parts of the courtyard that previously unseen. Here's that space, the preserved spaces, the courtroom, and some of the detail. This building, by the way, was built for $2.5 million in 1905. It was finished just in time for the 2006 earthquake. But that, by the way, if you do the math, is equal to $86 million today. So pretty good thing. So something to talk about in terms of how specific we build our buildings today. But on the left is what it was like, and then on the right is what it is after we restored it with light in the spaces. But the idea of preservation, of adaptive reuse, renovation is, for me, a really important part of what we should be doing today, and I think is part of our major roles in terms of making a sustainable environment. The international permit, which Susi mentioned, is really not the kind of governmental building you think of, but is, in my opinion, is an important civic element of our Bay Area. Just like our bridges, like our infrastructure, A civic building can be a courthouse, it can be an airport, it can be a bridge, it could be a water treatment plant. It's a question of intention. The intention here with this design was to make it really part of the civic realm of our city, to make it a real gateway into San Francisco. Number one, it was built upon a site that had no real presence, no real site. It was actually we had to lace through existing infrastructure to find places we could put 10 columns on either side of this major entry road, a 900-foot long roof, which is a double cantilever balanced in order to make it lightweight, intuitive wayfinding within, and a place that uses light to really make it a place of delight. The ticket counters as made pieces of architecture that we try to do, in which they serve multiple uses. Ticket counters here are actually above them within office space for staff, translucent scrims with for circulation, lights above it that light the entire airport and the entire terminal, and air that is dispersed at this point 15 feet above ground, cooling only that lower section of the building so that we're not cooling this entire massive volume. So it's a very energy efficient building. And the roof itself is all about simply about keeping rain and wind out and letting light into space. Not to forget about graphics is a very important part of civic architecture, and I think that sometimes we sort of overlook that fact, but graphics and architecture can really be part of what the civic experience is about giving a building its presence, its local presence. The courthouse in Los Angeles was here. The intention was to again create a real separation between this form and the urban kind of commercial world that surrounds it. To make a building is simply a very simple platonic form, a cube that rests upon this very steeply sloping site. That what First Street, what that line, that horizontal line is. Its slope is greater than what is allowed by even for wheelchairs if you're building a building that's too steep. So we lifted the building up off of this piece to make that orientation on this side, looking toward the civic realm, the civic city hall, and the civic gardens of Los Angeles, and to make a building basically float above gardens and let it be that clear form above this sloping street. The building itself is then the skin was actually derived from the city street grid, the orientation of the sun. The pleats around it are designed to admit view to allow views on one side of the pleat and to reject the solar path of the solar direct solar walking around the building, which results in almost a 50% reduction passively through the heat gain within the building. Is suspended by a hat truss overhead to allow the cube to actually float. This actually was a more efficient use of material and actually turned out to be even less expensive than doing foundations for that piece. The skin you see here, the layers that emit or reject the sun, emit the views, and then the kind of delicacy of and the dynamics of that skin as light moves across it during the day and we move around the building itself. The idea is to admit to let this skin be one that creates a very simple and subtle gesture toward what happens within the building, revealing the life of the building and the details of revealing a sort of delicacy of that skin. The building is designed around maximizing sun daylight within the building. It is a LEED Platinum building certified, and it has an EUI for those of you who care about these things of 28. So it's amazing. The interior spaces you can see are all about making that space light filled and reduce some of the issues that we often think about, especially with courthouses, about the anxiety that almost everyone, including judges, have in using these buildings to make this place one that is one of delight and is one of transparency and lightness and one that induces a sense of respect and dignity and confidence in the system. Here's a courtroom, again, natural light from the exterior behind the judge, from the interior to the light court on the other side, make these rooms occupiable without artificial light. Another really important part of civic architecture, in my opinion, in fact, Moynihan mentioned this as well, is the introduction of major art within the space. This is Mary Force here. I'm maybe kind of old-fashioned in this regard. I really believe that art should have its own place. That should not be confused with architecture. art that becomes part of a handrail or something that does not on the floor, to me, isn't the most rewarding. I think this kind of treatment and respect for art is really important. Here's the site. This is really kind of the general gift to Los Angeles, which is the two gardens on the upper and bottom part of green you see, which allow for ADA access to the building and to the and between the two streets. On the right is the major plaza that faces the Civic City Hall of Los Angeles. On the left is the courtyard for use by the staff and visitors to the courthouse. Here are the gardens. These transversing pathways allow wheelchairs to literally make the path from the subway system on Hill Street down through the courthouse and its plaza to Broadway Street, previously non-negotiated by wheelchairs. Here is the plaza facing the City Hall, of course, and the courtyard behind it. And for those who say that the political realm is no longer about physical space, it's about the social media, I would say that is absolutely not true. And proof is perhaps even here that yes, social media and physical space are related to one another and are important parts of what we think about, but the making of a physical place that can allow for voices to be heard is really a very, very critical part of democracy and architecture. So just to wrap up, this cathedral, as Susie mentioned, also is a place, a spiritual place that was intended obviously for Catholic faith, but it also is meant in terms of its design to be a place that is also about culture in general and about a civic place for this city. It's meant to be a place that welcomes everyone regardless of your faith, and it's meant to represent that in its architecture. It is positioned at the northern tip of Lake Mears, you can see. Its orientation is to long axis of the lake. The cathedral's help us turn to acknowledge that, with the rest of the site being positioned to create porosity and connection to the city itself. The lower level is at the lake level, 16 feet above is the level that connects to the city. In between those are the dependencies for the cathedral, allowing the cathedral itself to have its private position and to create a series of courtyards and plazas for the public. It's defined by very rigorous geometry, circles, which has a deep meaning in many religious space in this geometry in both plan and section. Its materials are simple. It is concrete, wood, galvanized metal, and glass, and that's it. The idea is to make this place about light, about the nature of space, about this ancient geometry that forms it, and the structure and the form are completely as one. The heavy timber wood has a series of compressive struts and tensile members that tie it together with this glass skin, which creates this luminous volume on the exterior. The inside, again, is about the aesthetics of light and touch the human scale and of the making of materials and positioning materials. Panel set of oils on the wall and icons. So the building is one again that changes with the season, with the day. It becomes a beacon in the evening for those of you who are interested but never have stood out and looked at the building. There's some way I think I can activate this, maybe.
I'm wondering if by PDF.
Oh, well, all right. Well, anyway, another time. There's a really interesting video. It's a 1 minute video that shows the transition of the building from the morning to the evening, where it becomes a luminous structure and a beacon in the end. So thank you very much. That is my very quick overview of Civic.
So these projects are just enormous, huge public investments. And as such, I'm curious to hear your thoughts and your approach to the obligation that comes with creating these places that educate, that capture community value, that talk about what's become now, post Moynihan, what's become the issues of today, equity, inclusion, climate change. How do you address those or bring that into these beautiful and inspirational projects as a lesson for us all.
Yeah, well, I'm sure everyone in this room knows in relationship to previous things, that's a very good question, Susie. And, all related. I would say one thing about the investment is that, a work of architecture is a massive investment, and it's a building is the world's largest man-made object. It is really important that we think about what a building's long-term life is going to look like, and can we make places worthy of being renewed in 50 years, as opposed to can we make a budget, and make a space that it serves, but it doesn't necessarily inspire. And I really think that the Vitruvius 2,000-year-old edict of firmness, blind delight, that the building has to be of its able to withstand the vicissitudes of nature and earthquakes and wind. It has to work with its functions and requirements, but it's that sense of delight, which really makes a building one that is worthy of standing for not 50 years, but 500 years. So I think it's really important that we really think about the life of these buildings and about how they would serve the communities and how they inspire, not simply serve a particular function, but really inspire their users and those in the community. So it is a big obligation to these are all, they're always, every piece of building, every building anyone does in this room, I'm sure, is one that has budget challenges. I've never seen one that doesn't. But it's a question of really finding the essence of a work of architecture and not embellishment that makes a building great. And I think if you can find that essence, that relates again, in the case of what I've shown here, light and structure and a form that relates together, that's what makes buildings viable for long term.
Thank you. The others have not signed obligations to go. Civic. Or would you like to just say?
Oh, some of it will be in my.
Okay, so coming soon. All
No,
right,
I don't know. I don't want to be too redundant.
well, why don't we just go ahead?
Okay. But just pass that on. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig.
Okay, let's see. Is that the event? Okay, great. I've had an interesting career. I think Susie was commenting later, a list of current projects and how little of my work has been commercial clients. I think at this point, with the exception of 2 tech clients and most of the housing work, not all, most of the housing work is private developers. I think everything else I've worked on has been cultural, nonprofit, or public institutional. And a lot of that is because it's what I focused on really. I mean, a lot of that, as you guys know, in architecture, you are what you eat. And if early on in your career you eat a certain building type, without knowing it, eventually you look up and that's what people know you as, and that's who comes to you and that's who hires you. Before you know, you're eating the same food over and over again. And so I think for me, a lot of it was just happenstance. So for whatever reason, I've done a lot of public work, civic work, and nonprofit. So I'll try to answer Susie's question in this brief presentation. So this has a certain simplicity to my organization. The basic goals I think I've always had with this work in the public sector have been these 4 goals: simplicity, clarity, durability, because of the obvious reasons of the responsibility and the effort it takes to build one of these buildings in terms of the political will and the money spent, and trying to therefore find a sense of timelessness with your design. And what that means, how it responds to the site, the program, and the locality, its adjacency, context, the variety of those issues, so that the building doesn't feel dated or worn quickly out of the box. So first I was going to talk about a few existing buildings, because that was one of Susie's questions. My template has always been Carlos Carpa and Castle Vecchio. I thought that was early on, right out of graduate school, I went and saw that project and I thought it was fantastic. And the delineation between new and old and the deferential treatment at the same time, the absolute lack of fear Garth had about doing things that were modern, strong, and of their period. So that's always guided me. So I think in preservation and in existing buildings, the text on the bottom is kind of my shorthand, but I've always tried to do a careful restoration of the important fabric of the building. But at the same time, always tried to make the new elements both discernibly new and differentiated, but make sure they're respectful and subtle and don't overwhelm the historic, and try to find the balance and to realize that each generation needs to be heard. The original generation from 100 years ago needs to be respected, but the current generation that's working like crazy to raise $100 million and put a building together in 10 years, that voice needs to be heard, and those tracks need to be laid for another generation 50 years later. At the Raffel Theater, we restored the exterior, built a new building next to it that tied into it. It was pretty meticulous restoration, but then once you got into the vestibule, it's all stainless steel and glass, and that which is new is very new, and that which is old has been carefully preserved. That same detailing, having the glass disappear into the plaster, etc., helps when you walk in the door to the historic lobby with the murals above, but the glass tends to disappear. And there's a nice dynamic for me between our generation that built this and the original generation that built the theater back in the 20s. We did a lot of the design work for the War Memorial Building, and then eventually did the top floor of the D.B. Willoughby Center. And there we converted what had been the Museum of Modern Art into a center for the opera. And we converted old galleries into rehearsal spaces, costume shop. In this case, the sculptures garden had to be converted into a flexible theater. Everything that was glass in the laylight is now translucent fabric with lots of acoustic detailing above it, but trying to read like the historic sculpture court at the same time, completely different use. So the catwalk for viability is suspended but kept clean of the cornice, which is a lot harder than it appears in terms of making the sight lines and the lighting angles work. But it was all part of not marring the historic form. Nearby at UC Berkeley, we were hired to look at Durant Hall opposite California Hall. And in order to preserve the building form, rather than having a handicap-able ramp on the north or south side coming into a mid-level, split level, which is the existing building, and then having to have a lift or something to get up. The idea was to cut down in the non-historic landscape immediately west of the building, cut one window, that black door, down to the new plaza and make a new entry by definition of the space, and therefore allow this photograph of the historic corridor to remain pure. At the East Bay Center, we were hired to convert an old 120-year-old livery into a theater. We had to raise the ceiling, which is an historic concern for the city, and do a new building next door. So the facade simply cuts and jags, if you will, around the historic building to show who's boss and to be deferential. On the west side, on Shotwell, it's a simple modern evocation of a piano nobile, a floating box above a solid core that reflects the program inside and really delights in it, stresses the structure. Down the road a little bit, we've worked for years on various layers of the open museum, but we handled it no differently than Durant Hall or the Legion of Honor, an historically significant building, simply done in 1969 and not 1869. So we didn't touch any of the concrete, didn't cut a single hole in it. Everything we did was additive, was done in stainless steel, a soft finished stainless steel. And we even made all the connections into the tie cone holes of the concrete, so it'd be hypothetically reversible if it came out and you could attach the tie cone holes, and none of the concrete was marred. And I met with Rhodes when we started working on it, and he was actually pretty happy because we kind of kept the form of the building and made everything else accretive. More recently, we had to cut into concrete. We wanted a new entry on the northeast corner and then the southeast corner to finally connect the building to Lake Merritt and connect it to Oak Street. And what was interesting is Kevin Roach's original design drawings, I don't know if you knew this, he wanted that to be porous and open. But with all the radical issues going on at the time, the city asked him to wall off the court and to make it secure. So I went back and I saw in their archives some of the photographs of a more porous entry. So I felt comfortable going back to landmarks and proposing that we could go back to Roach's original application in a different way because it was already built in concrete, but to open it up and expose it to the lake, and I think everyone felt comfortable with that. Similarly, this was the condition that we added, the restaurant, the ramp, the AD access, and the window that wasn't there. It had always been an opaque wall facing Laney College and the south, and the restaurants had never survived because they had no identity, no visibility, couldn't be open at all hours when the museum wasn't. So we had to cut into the building, and we used a lot of the same proportions and methodology of Roach's original building, but applied them to a place where it hadn't been done. The East Bay Center, also here in the East Bay, in Richmond, the building was built about 100 years ago. The ground floor has been mucked up and covered in plaster, and so we were hired to convert it to an art center. So we took the plaster off and did something that was unusual. We made it all glass and showcased the education, dance, music, programming, and they've never had trouble with graffiti or violence of any sort, and people embrace the positive will. Also here in East Bay, we more recently did a chapel, St. Mary's. And I think with new buildings, my own personal theory has been slightly different, is I've always liked the early modern work from the 1920s and 1930s, which had strong belief in making the public program very visible, very legible from the exterior, make the building interesting by virtue of expressing the component pieces. And ideally, I've always added the layer of making it welcoming, because I think that's something where the early moderns failed. There was so much of a focus on the object and less on the urban quality of being welcoming and transparent. I think particularly in a culture like ours, which has so many different people, so many different points of view, I think we need that more than ever. But so therefore, we've always tried to use transparency and interconnecting, interlocking volumes to get people in, move them through the space, through the building. And ultimately, it's obvious because we're all architects, Craig said it too, but as architects, we want to make our buildings beautiful. So we can have a lot of rationale and a lot of logic, a lot of analysis. If the building's not beautiful, we fail. And so I've always tried to work at taking these elements and making a beautiful building. Also try to make them sustainable. This is a building we did a couple of years ago. We finished at UCSF, where it was all about making a great workplace for the scientists. So it's all daylight coming into the middle, and then covering it with a very cost-effective aluminum screen that gets about 80% of the direct heat gain and glare out of the building. So their air conditioning load is down and the natural light is up, and it's a nice work environment. And we just expressed the bottom two floors, which are clinical spaces for the same scientists who are doing the research in the third, fourth, and fifth floors. Just trying to express that. The top floor are public spaces, offices, spaces where the university holds functions. So we tried to express that, and it reaches out to a park across the street. At Savo Pool, similarly, almost in a Luke Kahn way, the serve and servant is direct here. The locker room, restrooms are a low little box, and the big box is the natatorium. But unlike the existing building we replaced, we turned it due south, so it would have an interior focus on Stern Grove, set the floor height of the pool, so you look over the cars and traffic, and really try to bring a kind of a borrowed landscape in the Japanese manner, maybe, of the trees from Stern Grove into the space, big windows at each corner to balance the daylight, and therefore they typically don't have the artificial lights on during the day. It saves them energy, it gets rid of the noise, but it's a really pleasant environment. It feels much more like a high-end private pool than a $3 a visit of a swimming pool. In Santa Cruz, it was similar logic, but cutting into a hill. So the concrete cuts into the hill, and all the private spaces are in the concrete, less open, less warm, less tactile. And then the public elements, the library, meeting spaces, community rooms, are on the left, expressed in the wood. Very simple expression. And the space between the courtyard is the entry. Rona's project is a courthouse in Mammoth Lake. And long, low architecture to differentiate from the mountains behind. Simple expression of the dark masonry of the hard shell exterior, and then the blonde brick wraps into the lobby, becomes wood, sort of warm and humane, and then comes back out on the lower right. And then just to have fun and express the dialogue with trees and nature, there's some porosity in the skin. The lobby moves with the spirit. Building we did with HOK, public safety building in Mission Bay, that big screen is actually extremely performative. It keeps the south facing sun way down so that we can have a lot of glass facing west, because 3rd Street is the main street of Mission Bay. In order to make that tolerable, because we shut down so much daylight, those are conference rooms and meeting rooms behind the screen where people are in there for an hour or two, and not all day. That allowed a lot of daylight and cool light for the office workspaces, and then tried to, in the way I like to do things, articulate the form simply and clearly, the concrete base, the blast safety, security issues, and then the big zinc frame, which is there about modulating the light and the heat gain and controlling the view. And then Craig feels the same, he's talked to it, is this issue of craft in the public realm where we can show this man-made form and express I think the great effort and human drama of building these buildings, and let them be a testimony to the community that made the effort to gather them, is very important to us. At SF Jazz, there was an issue of taking the San Francisco Civic Center, which has a bunch of beautiful old Bogart buildings, but they're not transparent, they're not very welcoming. Their audience has been declining rapidly for the last 20 years. The goal was to make a building that would have a higher audience, increase the audience, be more part of the city, bring the sidewalk in. And even though the performance space is opaque for reasons of sound control, light control, etc., all the other peripheral uses, lobbies, education, cafe, offices, etc., are extremely open to the street, even a little performance room on the corner. So to that end, we tried to do everything in low iron glass back when it was still expensive, drop it into the sidewalk, into the head. We suspended the stair with no columns, just using the guardrail, those kinds of things to keep it light, open, and make it feel like if you're on the sidewalk, you're halfway in the building. Project I did with Craig on Moscone was a similar idea in the bottom 18 feet, just to keep low iron glass, bring the city into the lobby. It had been kind of a bunker, if you remember it, a bad 1980s building, not unlike a lot of buildings from that period that were afraid of civil disorder and unrest. They were secure buildings, but they weren't urbane. And the goal was to turn the building inside out and make it open. We did the same thing with the Conservatory Music. The bottom 25 feet is all glass, performance space, cafe, radio station, restaurant. And then we augmented that by making the top a performance space also, to really revel in the public nature of the building. It's a 200-seat hall that's ticket-free, open to the public for every concert, over 200 a year. And we tried to say, okay, if that's a great public benefit, we're going to highlight that. When you're in that floor, it has a beautiful view of City Hall and off towards the ocean to the west. And it has shades that come down when need be, but there's built-in louvers on the west side, and the primary view is north. And Wild Hall is all about not only this daylight control for the scientists, but to engage the park and nature. It's backlit into the workplaces with this large atrium that has a big skylight to bring daylight down and into the inside of these labs, so that the scientists often are working without their artificial light on. And then my last image is a project I did a long time ago, one of my first. That's a soccer storage room and a drop off for that's my son sitting there. And but it was all about that same idea of simplicity, clarity, timelessness, and really for me volume, which I didn't mention, but the wood goes right to the top. There's no metal at all. All the detailing is about having one material, wrap corners, turn surfaces, trying to express the primacy of volume as an expression of lightness, as opposed to an expression of weight or object, and trying to make the space prevalent and the object subsidiary. And wherever we can do that, wherever I can do that, I feel like I've made a good civic building, because that expresses the use by people and not necessarily the architect's will. And that's always been my personal goal, and that's it for me.
So
Can I pass this to-
these, your projects, Craig project, Rona's projects, Rodney's projects, I'm sure these are, as we said before, they're distinct. They're not background buildings. These are monuments, for lack of a better word. They're kind of they're statement pieces. And I'm curious to hear, how do you talk about this to your client? We're building a monument, you know, how
They're all different, they're all different, you know, the arts clients, and we have a lot of them now in the office, they want the building to be a draw, it's all about audience development, everyone we're working on and have worked on.
So it is
The
a
20 and 30-year-olds aren't going the way their parents and grandparents did, right? So they're all declining. They all want the building to be something to get them attention and to draw people in. And then their hope is if their programming is good, they'll retain some. So they want your building to be attention grabbing. The city planning, design review, they want it to be a good part of the city, both as a draw and a placemaker, to make a better block, make a better neighborhood. And you have to convince your client, in my opinion, that they can do both. That they can make a building that's a draw and be part of the city in a respectful and intelligent way. And that takes a while sometimes. Some clients get it early on, some clients fight it. Some clients run up against the wall and the city or the planners or whoever have to admonish them. And anyway, it varies from person to person and director to director, board of trustees from board of trustees. But we always try to tell them that it's one and the same. What's good for them is good for the city. What's good for the city is good for them. And eventually, I think we've had every single one come to agree with that. But it takes sometimes a great deal of effort to get that other perspective in.
Any other thoughts to add to that? That kind of convincing for the unique, distinct draw, that part of the fabric, but not part of the fabric. I mean, I just looking through these last night when I was flipping, wow. None of these sit back. They all step forward in how to, that's a lot of convincing. It just feels like there's a lot of dialogue around what it looks like.
I think that's interesting. It's interesting questions, Suzanne, and I appreciate Mark's responsible too. That I think, it's often forgotten that background buildings are sometimes the most important thing you can do is buildings that will actually form would describe a space more so than look at me. And so sometimes actually it's interesting, especially if you ever work in China, find that it's always about we want something that is never been done before, this really unique, and by the way, it should be cheap. And if you look at some certain cities, certain countries where the economy has all of a sudden ballooned, you see these in certain Middle Eastern countries and certainly some Asian countries where everything is new and everything is about the new, everything's about something unique, as opposed to more quietude. And so sometimes that's it's sometimes more difficult to convince your client that kind of a quietness, quiet but dignified building is the way to go. And I know Mark and our aesthetics are very, very closely in line. So I will belabor the point that simplicity, clarity, structural relationship is all very much a part of what makes really great buildings. And it's not necessarily because it's something that is strange, unique, and novel. So that's sometimes that's more difficult than to say, oh yeah, you need to do something really bold here. The boldness comes from, again, finding the essence of what a building should be. I think.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And maybe it's more a product of our age too, in the 1980s and 90s, there was a reconsideration of modernism and the rediscovery of contextualism. For a lot of us, it was borrowed and not very well done when it was full historicism, but the basic idea of making better blocks, looking at histories, studying the buildings next to you, considering materiality, not necessarily making an object building for its own sake, has always stayed with me, and it's always been part of my thinking for any project. It's just, I try to do it my own way and find very often an abstract way to relate to data mines, massing, rhythm of the block, to not disregard the building, even if we're trying to make something like a lot of our projects now in the office, they do want them to be identity rich. But how do you make the identity rich really, what Renzo Piano has always said to me, genus loci, how do you make it based on this place and time? And I think he's right. I think that's the trick, is to make a beautiful building that is also grounded in the genus loci. So,
Thank you. Anyone else, or are we ready for Rodney?
You ready? Are you ready? I love hearing these two kids. My architecture, the architecture I admired, was the architecture of the 40s and the 50s. I started in Berkeley in 51. And enrolled in architecture, but I was probably one of the most naive, because I didn't know who Frank Lloyd Wright was. And I was recruited for the rowing team, and was a freshman, his name was Coxon on the varsity rowing team. And the faculty at Cal was one of the 3 or 4 best faculties in the country, maybe the world. Eric Mendelsohn, Charles Eames, Bucky Fuller, Paul Rudolph, those were my idols. He showed up. Bucky told us how to build geodesic domes, and we built geodesic domes in the courtyard. Students had come over and redid the entire undergraduate school and got rid of the Beaux-Arts. Worcester came in from MIT and brought some of his hotshot MIT instructors. And because we were friends to MIT, we learned how to build the buildings, not design the buildings especially, but build the buildings. So at the same time we were taking the design courses, we took full engineering courses, and I failed every one of them. They were 8 o'clock classes, so I repeated every one of them and took them with the engineers and struggled through. But I want to put everything that these guys have done and what we've done into context, because it's very flattering to be invited to one of these panels. And I want to tell you, I've been in a lot of them, from Perth, Australia, from Dublin, Ireland, Holland, and been the keynote speakers when I was in Perth, Australia, with the national AIAEB awards. Well, I was the chairman of the awards, and they said, well, why'd you ask me? I just do houses. And the officers looked at me, they said, you do houses. That's why you're here. Well, why didn't you invite me to the window about you do houses? Well, yeah, that really impressed me, because that's what I did. And I'll give you an idea. Contemporary house today, you can't find many under $1 million. The first houses we designed at Bay Farm Island, we sold for $14,000. And we developed the technology that A2 Jones down in Los Angeles did, post and beam housing and 241 framing. And these guys don't know what I'm talking about. We learned how to build a building. And we figured out how to build a building efficiently, because we worked on a plywood module, which is 4x8, which is kind of like the tatami module that the Japanese, and we didn't have any scrap wood. Everything was designed so we could span 6 feet with a 2x6. We could span the flooring with 1 1/8 inch plywood. We built it on piers, we could do it on hillsides. The Ackman homes were technically very interesting, but very limited to flat ground. We learned how to build buildings on hillsides. I didn't have any institutional clients, I had developers, I did a sketch photo, said, don't you want us to do it? Just do what you want. So I didn't have, it was a time when zoning didn't exist. And we could go in for a building permit on a Monday and start construction on a Tuesday. And it was terrific. What we had to do is design buildings for people like you, where you would spend your money to buy, not a government, not an institution, with a very personal relationship with you. So we designed things that people would buy, and we weren't going to design the 56 Chevy, which is what's being done today. Now, I want to put this in the context because we've got these very famous architects to my right. They've done these really superb buildings, but there are other buildings in the state that have been done that I want to sort of acknowledge. Let's start down with San Diego. The San Diego Zoo. You think of San Diego, you can't avoid the San Diego Zoo. The Hotel del Coronado. Superb. I don't even know who the architect was, but I know someone like that Hot was still there. The Charger Stadium was designed by a Cal grad, and it got a little gone over. And of course, there's the Salk Institute, and I think you know a little bit about the Salk Institute. Let's go to Palm Springs. There's the Bob Hope residence done by John Lautner. Any of you guys know who John Lautner is? You all know? Good. And then there's this other guy named Richard Northrop, who designed the Kaufman House. And then we designed the Vintage Club. And guys like Warren Buffett formed the Vintage Club, and Gates Walsh the Vintage Club. And it's distinctive because it doesn't look like the typical Southern California mission style building. And we've been honored numerous times for the Vintage Club. And what we were inspired by is that in the desert, well, what's typical of a desert building? Pyramids. There's 7 pyramids at Giza. We did 52 pyramids. And it was completely copied and duplicated in Japan. The helicopter ride in Japan when we were doing some projects there. We flew over a golf course and we looked at the Vintage Club. Okay. That takes me a little bit further north to something called the Hearst Castle with San Simeon, and it was done by a local gal.
Yeah.
Okay. Then there's San Simeon is Julia Morgan. Then you get to Newport Beach, then we do Promontory Point. Promontory Point is on the 25-year war, the gold level. It is the tallest horizontal building in the world. It's taller than the Empire State Building, but it's all dragged out. It tumbles down the building, and it's similar to some work that Caesar has done in Portugal. But it was built for $24 a foot. The first resident was Raquel Ross. I always remember that. And Don Newcomb was it. So then in Los Angeles, you can't. What's the image of Los Angeles? You always see over and over again a Hollywood sign. I've never done a Hollywood sign. You guys have never done a Hollywood sign, but there it is. And it's just built out of corrugated metal and tin. And there's never a year in movies that you don't see pictures of a Hollywood sign. Well, that's pretty special, right? Yeah. Then there's the Griffith Park Observatory. You always see that. There's the Santa Monica Pier. Did you know that Charles Moore designed part of he designed the Ferris wheel and some of the exhibits at the Santa Monica Pier. This guy was versatile. He's one of the nicest guys you've ever met. And you can't not know Capitol Records. Lou Nagar from Walton Beck and Associates, Cal grad, he was in school when I was there. Then there's the, Craig Elwood did the Art Institute, East LA. And then there's another arts building done by Caesar Pelly in Rochdale. There's a great John Lockwood building there. And there's, you mentioned Holly House now, there's like.
Yeah.
Not yet.
Yeah,
Just
it-
did.
LA is littered with Richard Whitehead. My son lives in a neighborhood of, he's an architect. He's gotten a lot of awards. Maybe he'll get to do an institutional building. His latest published building will be the bicycle repair shop at Santa Barbara. University of Santa Barbara. And the kindergarten.
He and I got, at AIA the same day.
Oh, that reminds me, 50 years ago, I became a fellow.
Oh,
And sitting next to me in Washington DC was this guy named Frank Gehry. DFG. And we didn't know each other, and he knew this and stuff like that. He said, "How old are you?" And I said, "I'm 40. And he said, "Oh, shit, I'm 40. Well, how old are you, Frank? He said, 41. On his 64th birthday, he was on the cover of Time magazine. And by this time we were friends, and I phoned him and talked to the secretary. I said, "I want to talk to Frank." And he said, "I said, it's fine." We got on the line. "You son of a bitch, you lied to me. I'm 60.
You got it.
So, then there's the Crystal Cathedral in LA. Okay, and there's the Hollywood Bowl. All right, and there's the Brahms Chinese Theater. Okay, there's the Bradbury Building. Okay, there's Disney. We can't leave out Disney. Yeah. A.Q. Jones who designed the recycling house, and there's a real lesson plan there, because he figured out how to do post and beam construction. And we copied them. Then there's Schindler houses, there's Raphael Soriano houses, there's Pierre Koenig houses, there's Killing for Freddie and Split houses, there's the Eames resident, ITA for Charles Eames. And I visited one, and there's right across the little meadow where I was in Sheridan House. There's the Bud Stop enhancement, and there's the LA Airport Central Building with the spider.
Yeah.
Okay. There's Pillage Design Center out in West LA. There's a new stadium, which is fabulous, the SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, which is just terrific. And they figured out something that has been abandoned. The LA Chargers and the Rams both use it. Okay. Which is, the LA Coliseum had UCLA, UST, the LA Dons and the Rams all sharing the same facility. And everybody's gone bonkers now. They don't know how to share their building. So, then I kind of move up here to the SoFi Stadium and the Wayfarers Chapel. Now, Wayfarers Chapel, I don't know whether that was done by right son or by right.
Right, son.
It's right son. At 888 Doheny Boulevard in Beverly Hills, there's another modular or ceramic concrete block building that either is right or right son did it, and it's where Marilyn Monroe lives. On Halloween, my friends and I went trick or treating there. And there's this big Cadillac parked out in front of me. Look at the registration in those days, remember, was on the steering wheel. Joe DiMaggio. So we knocked on the door.
Oh, really?
Knocked on the door and said, "Trick or treat." And Marilyn came out with cookies and said, "I think this myself."
Wow.
How old were you?
I was in college already.
Old to be trick or treating, right?
She lived there. And I'll tell you, I fell in love immediately. She was worth every bit of it. So let's leave Los Angeles and head to, San Francisco. What's the most important structure in the Bay Area? Golden Gate Bridge. We didn't design it. We didn't design it. There's a holiday building by Willis Post. So you guys can do curtain walls up at the
I think there
zoo.
was an architect involved in the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah.
Not, the
Somebody had to
engineer
pick that
really
one.
did it. Yeah. They take credit.
The light fixtures, a few architectural decisions. Wait,
Let's spread the credit. That's what-
oh, is that the big
That's okay,
message?
we can spread it.
Spread it.
Then, there's an SOM building that I've always liked, that a lot of people, that Craig didn't design. Okay? Called the Zellerbach building. And I remember coming back from the Air Force and got back to work and, who was the design partner at, Chuck Bassett. And we were with Chuck Bassett and we were laying under his desk at the Zellerbach building. And that was a fabulous, fabulous structure. And one of that lever that was done in New York, the first two really modern buildings being done, along with, the Civic building. Then we did Golden Gateway Commons or something, because it's been called the second most important historical building in San Francisco, next to the Civic Center. They said, well, that's an immigration colony, that's where the Chinese immigrants came. And we searched all over the building to find clues. When we designed, we couldn't find any evidence of it at all. But we put a little museum in the lobby of the building and display some of them. Designed the building, and I went to work one day and it was on fire. Huh? Yeah, it was on fire. And the firemen were there and west wall had collapsed. And I called up one in New York and I said, your building got on fire. Your building's falling down. And he said, well, what are you gonna do, Rodney? I said, they're gonna start all over again. We didn't rebuild the wall. We put a 21st century warehouse into an 18th century or 18th century warehouse, 19th century. And then there's I don't know if you realize how important the Fox Plaza is. I think it's real. Fox Plaza was one of the first mixed-use buildings. Yeah, retail on the ground floor, offices on the residential. It's not a great building, but it's important to how it's done. Then there's the Eichler homes, they're all over the place. The Alcoa building, which is so ambitious. There's an aluminum nice building on Market Street. I can't ever remember the name of it. Aluminum.
425 Market, maybe? I think it's the address. Oh, you're talking about the old Shatter Tower, which is now Shatter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that. And then there's the Alcoa building, which you guys know. There's a B of A, which actually Worcester designed. SOM did the working drawings. B of A would not let Worcester do the working drawings. They didn't trust them. And Worcester got a hold of SOM, and you guys partnered with them because you guys had the only large enough insurance policy. Employee that worked for us named Ted Kennedy, and he went over to detail all the granite.
So, so what does all this mean? What is all of this?
Well, I'm doing it.
You're not done yet. Yes, you are, because we only have 5 minutes, so. Mother,
They can wait on 90.
I tried.
I tried here over 80 years. There's a Hyatt Regency building, talk about any famous places. There's a Palace of Fine Arts.
Little bit there.
Let's see, SOM MOA building, right? Oriental Warehouse, I did at Civic Center building, the Russell Residence by Eric Mendelson. And he was one of my instructors. And he did Maimonides. Then, what we don't remember a lot, or give credit for, a guy by the name of Mario Campi designed all the bridges and the freeways on 280. Let's get to the East Bay. Okay. The most important building in the East Bay is what? Civic Christian Child Church. Okay, you haven't been there, go. There's a fine arts building on the Berkeley campus that Mark Cavagnero did. There's a Cal Memorial Stadium. Cal Memorial Stadium is important for two reasons. It's terrific locations. It doesn't have a running track around it. So you're close to the action and there's no parking. Which means you walk to the stadium and you walk back to the stadium. Well, they did a little parking lot. There's Campanile, Claremont Hotel, the Hearst Gym by, Lee's Gym by Julie Morgan. Open Museum, because
Kevin Rose did,
well, yeah, but you didn't fuck it up.
That's what he said. That's what he said.
Then there's a Kaiser Center, which is one of the first important buildings in Oakland, and Oakland was a different place then. Okay? I designed every bathroom in the Kaiser Center. My first assignment at Walmart. There's the Catholic Cathedral that's done by our colleague down there. The Science Center, that we'll talk about later on.
Later on.
The Oakland Coliseum. Oakland Coliseum was an SOM project. By Golson. Both the pavilion and the Coliseum were done for $42 million.
Yeah, right.
The Raiders played there. The A's played there. The Warriors played there. There was a hockey team at that time that played there. I think they should just keep the darn thing. What? When you get to, Green County, this is the end. We're coming close.
We're getting in there, right?
Everybody got a gas.
We're running out of architects. There's this guy named Frank Lloyd Wright that did it in Civic Center. The Christian Science Church by Callister is over there. If you haven't been there, go, you can only get in on Sunday. There's the Ludican residence that you may never have heard of, done in 1948 by Jack Miller. Fabulous building.
He was Warren Clinton.
He was one, they were lovely. I know both. I was in school, but it's still there. Hilmer House was closed in 1948, and I got a chance to go, because that's when the model was screwed up. Okay, we're coming down to the wire. The Sea Ranch. And LTW, the condos, the model of the homes done by Ashford. Master plan by, what was Tammy Larry Howard? Okay. And the rec center, I think, with LTW, who's in the rec? Huh?
It was Bill Turnbull.
We're starting. Bill
He made the
Knight.
wall.
And, graphics were done by Stoffer. I am done. Just of all this, it's nice to be included in that list, isn't it?
Yeah, Rodney's list.
Now we can look at some pictures of the science center. Now, we don't know anything about doing the science center. We got interviewed and all these techies that were interviewing us. And I didn't design it. Bob Gary was the name. designer in our office, and, Richard Smith was the one that got us interviewed. And it was in our office. And, so go back to that slide.
No, can't go
Move
back.
forward.
Can't go back.
Only one gear and this is James.
And there's a number of proposals that we didn't know anything about. Had a planetarium there and a $9 million size projector. But we listened to our clients and they told us what to do. There's the planetarium. And we had an IMAX in there. And we have all these special labs. And the thing that's important about the building, because I know either one of these two guys can do on the building as well, was the events that occur in the building and all the exhibits that are brought from the building and all. But the thing about the building is you can actually go to the moon. You can take a ride to the moon in the building, you can see all these constellations and exhibits. The Star Wars guys came over there and did exhibits. So, yeah, you can go in there and see all these wonderful things. And then we have an observatory in the building with the telescopes that were there from the old Oakland. All we have to do is really sort of enclose the building and make the connections and try not to screw things up.
That's funny.
Stay out of trouble.
Stay out of trouble.
Don't decide anything where they'll say afterwards.
It's the same as being a doctor, do no harm.
You know.
But we like the building. It's there's the, telescopes. Yeah, you can go take classes, there's the original telescope, which was moved over. You can take classes there and build your own telescope. Wow.
Where is that?
It's in the Oakland Hills.
Oh,
It's
wow.
on, it's off Risley. Well, it's there at Skyline.
Now, this, you know, we've gotten awards for this thing, but I was reminded of the fact we went to Walnut Creek and they had designed a civic office building. It was the name of it, wasn't it? Civic office building. And they gave out the awards for it. And when they showed the slides in the building, they said SON. And I thought, we're getting the sticky for SON. Well, thank you guys.
So we respect everyone's time. We're a little bit over, so well, thank you all for being here. Thank you all for the inspiration, Rodney. The history of all of California was great. Our next presentation is going to be June 15th, right here, about higher education. Another great please join us and see everyone.
I brought a number of monographs, so if you guys would like a monograph, you're more than welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, that's wonderful.
Well, thank
Thank
you
you all.
all again.